Well, back to our top story now, and the derailed negotiations between Ukraine and the US as European leaders gather in London to try and get things back on track. Joining us live now is the Liberal Senator and former Ambassador Dave Sharma. Dave, good to have you with us this morning. So last hour I was speaking to the former Polish ambassador to Ukraine, who was there for the first couple of years of the war, and he seems to think that the relationship is irreparable between Zelensky and Trump. Do you think it can be saved? It can be repaired?
I think it can be. Look, certainly it underwent some significant damage at that press conference. There is not a lot of personal trust between Zelensky and Trump, but ultimately, the United States will act in its own interest. We're talking here about an interaction between two leaders, but we need to talk about the interaction between two countries and two different sets of interests. And I think that's what will keep the United States engaged in this process. It might not be in the way that Ukraine wants or prefers, but I don't think the US has an interest in completely walking away from this, letting Russia do what it wants, letting Ukraine suffer what it must. I just don't think that's a US national interest.
Well, it appears to be the sticking point is security, right, around this mining agreement. But in your view, if Americans are there as per mining companies, is that enough security to perhaps stop Russia from getting ideas to invade again down the track?
Look, I would say that, US companies and private sector companies were operating in Ukraine prior to the invasion in 2022. So, no, I don't think that's the same safeguard. I mean, I think, and President Trump is of the view that if he makes a deal with Putin, Putin will honour the terms of that deal. Zelensky, and this is really at the heart of their disagreement in the press conference of the White House, Zelensky is of the view that you cannot take Putin at his word, and there needs to be some sort of security guarantees.
Yeah, and I think he's right on that point. Is he not?
Well, I mean, if I was in his position, Zelensky, I would not be taking it at his word. I mean, Ukraine's initial creation back in 1994 was meant to be underpinned by a security guarantee involving a number of outside powers, which hasn't been honoured at this time around. So, of course, I think you'd be crazy if you're Ukraine's leader not to at least seek quite strongly some firm security assurances than just someone's word for it.
It seems like Keir Starmer's having a moment at the moment, Dave. He's really leading these negotiations in London. Are you sure that they can work out their side of things before it goes back to the US?
Well, I think they can. Look, I think certainly my view is Europe can and should have done a lot more to support Ukraine. I think their national interests are more directly engaged by this conflict.
So Trump's right on that point.
Yeah, I think he is. I think he's got a fair point to make. I mean, the US military assistance to Ukraine's about $60 to $70 billion. European was slower, but it has increased. It's about $50 billion. But, I mean, Keir Starmer made the commitment last week, I think, or he made the suggestion that the UK would be prepared to send some sort of security presence to Ukraine. I think France is potentially willing, Germany a bit more reluctant. But I think that sort of leadership from Europe will help get the United States back on board, potentially, if they know that they're not going to be the people at risk and they're not going to be underwriting all of this.
So do we need to turn that argument back on ourselves now? I mean, do we need to be doing more? Do we need to spend more on military during this Trump administration?
Absolutely. I think there's no doubt that we need to do more to invest in our own security capabilities and our defence capabilities and show a greater willingness to stand on our own feet here. I mean, the Labor government's taken, or they will claim, defence spending has been taken to 2% of GDP. But if you look at the size of our Navy, for instance, we operate the oldest and smallest surface Navy we have in Australia's history, at least since 1950. Our acquisitions are coming online far too slowly. We heard in Senate estimates last week that a decision on the multi-purpose frigate is now not going to be taken until next year rather than this year. All these delays are problematic for us. And just as European defence spending has been getting a high degree of scrutiny under President Trump, so too will Australia's.
So that leads me to the question about trade now, away from military onto trade. You've seen these kind of troubling comments from Peter Navarro, his top trade advisor, Trump's top trade advisor. Kind of feel like we're not going to get this carve out. I might be wrong, but that's just how it feels at this stage. So the UK is making progress in its own trade deal. It offered a state visit in person. I guess that's the advantage of face-to-face meetings. Do you think Anthony Albanese missed a trick by not going to Washington and seeing Donald Trump face to face rather than a phone call, or does it not matter?
I don't think it matters greatly. I mean, I think President Trump puts a high stock in personal relationships and personal diplomacy, and Anthony Albanese doesn't know Donald Trump. He's never met him before, as far as I'm aware. And a number of leaders, the Japanese Prime Minister, the Jordanian King, the Ukrainian President, perhaps not a model to emulate, but a number of leaders and making the trip to Washington in recent weeks. And I would make the point, I mean, Peter Navarro was there in the first Trump administration. That did not stop us from getting an exemption from tariffs at that time. So I would expect us, if the Albanese government is going about this correctly, we should also get an exemption this time around. But the question is, have they done all the diplomacy that's necessary? And you'd say face-to-face interaction has been an element that's missing here.
Okay. We'll have to leave it there, Dave, but good to chat as always. Thanks. We'll talk again soon.